you believe in miracles? I need to shut off the doubt before it consumes my hope, so instead I will state that God must be great because I am still alive, though no miraculous recovery did he yet provide. But on the other side of heaven, I'll run free and wide, no trauma in my heart, no thorn in my side. There are miracles right now to be given if we open up our hearts and listen, as we prepare to ask our question, holding on to our hopes in a leap of faith position. Do you believe in miracles?
How many 35-year-olds just wept with joy that you're considered a young adult? Yeah. I thought I had a foot in death's door. I'm a young adult. Congratulations. Everyone took a trip this past week. My wife went away for a few days on a girls' getaway, and she posted on her Facebook, "It's nice to get away from the noise for a while and get with the girls." I tried really hard not to personalize that, right? And I'm not mad, I'm fine, that's fine. But I would like to start off by saying a couple things my wife struggles with. Just kidding. Is that the worst thing, having a loose cannon for a husband with a mic? It's like, Darlene told me not to share this, but yeah, how many times a day? My name's Graham Cowgill. Glad you guys are here with us this morning. I already have a dry throat, and so normally I apologize before I drink, but now I'm just going to drink. No apologies this morning. We are starting this series, When Pigs Fly, talking about the miraculous and really, does God still do miracles? What do they look like? And maybe a big question is, how do we posture ourselves to be used in the miraculous? Is there something that's on us? Like what do we do? Whenever we ask this question, does God still do miracles? I think maybe at the beginning it's an I don't know. If you look even just slightly below the surface, it becomes more and more evident the more you look for it. This building essentially is founded on the defining phrase of when pigs fly. Really. First of all, let's take 10 years ago. A lot of you guys have read about that this was nightown, right? Probably experienced it. And if somebody would have told you then, hey, this building is going to be like a staple of goodness and hope in this community, you'd say, yeah, right, when pigs fly. And if they would have said, hey, Nighttown's going to be a church at some point, you'd say, yeah, when pigs fly. Not only that, but Pastor Eric and Pastor Darlene have had their eye on this building for a long time. They grew up here and have always said, man, that building is in the perfect location. Can you imagine if this building, centrally located, was something that instead of being used for perpetual confusion, is used for perpetual hope? But everyone would just say, yeah, when pigs fly. It's not even there. But they continued to pray, and they saw that even despite circumstances not lining up or despite logic, that God is relentless in his pursuit of chasing down his children, even to the tune of taking this building that was used for confusion and now turn it into a place where people come in broken and they leave with hope. Pastor Eric, his story is very much like Nighttown. Let's be honest, right? And people that he grew up with, if they said, hey, Eric's going to be a pastor someday, they'll say, yeah, when Nighttown becomes a church, right? Right? Yeah, when pigs fly. But very much like this building was prayed over continuously, I know that Eric had people in his life who prayed over him continuously, that didn't give up, that said, I know how much value you have. I know that God has created you special. You have this ability to draw people in. God is going to use you in incredible ways, people who relentlessly prayed, and still now we see this miracle. That Pastor Eric's a miracle, just like this building of transformation, and God continues to do it. And so this phrase, when pigs fly, I think that every one of us has something in our life that just feels like a when pigs fly circumstance. You're wanting it, maybe you have like a glimmer of hope remaining, but you're hedging your bets. You're afraid to give too much to it because it just hurts when it doesn't come to fruition. And so we just kind of give up on the miraculous, right? We give up hope. It hurts too badly whenever we get let down. So what does it look like? We're going to look at two stories today that I don't think are normally told because they need a little bit of context to them. And while maybe the context of when these stories take place is far different than what we live in today, I do think that there are some foundational phrases in there that we can latch onto. And so the first one is this. Here's the context. God promises this man Abraham that he said, your descendants are going to be more than you can count. More than the stars in the sky, more than the grains of sand. Your offspring is going to bless and inhabit the earth. You will have, that's how many descendants you're going to have. Well, he promises this to Abraham in an old age. In fact, he appears to Abraham when Abraham is 99 years old and says, I'm going to see this promise through. Not only is he 99, but Abraham's wife, Sarah, is 90 years old when he makes that promise. I don't know how many 99-year-olds you know, but there's not a lot of Scrabble going on at 99, you know what I'm saying? Right? Not a lot going on, and still he goes, I'm telling you, your descendants are going to inhabit the earth. And so, Genesis 21, verse 1, now the Lord was gracious to Sarah, his wife, as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. Sarah became pregnant and bore a son to Abraham in his old age at the very time God had promised him. Abraham gave the name Isaac to the son Sarah bore him. When his son Isaac was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God commanded him. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. Sarah said, God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. And she added, who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children, yet I have borne him a son in his old age? There are a few truths that I want to pull from this first, because one is a foundational mindset that I think that we have when we discount ourselves. That we say we can't be used in the miraculous because fill in the blank. And here's the first one, is that God keeps his promise in spite of us. God keeps his promise in spite of us. I know we think, hey, Abraham, Father Abraham, I'm sure he and his family were like the church deacons and everything was, of course, God's going to keep his promise to Abraham. No. Let me tell you about Abraham. 2 chapters earlier, Abraham's nephew, Lot, there in Sodom, just give you a glimpse, he thought your family was messed up. Lot essentially has 2 daughters who don't have kids of their own either, and they want kids. And so one night, they get their dad, Lot, drunk. They sleep with their dad and get pregnant by their dad because they want kids. That's 2 chapters earlier. Isn't the Bible just full of like heartwarming stories? You know what I mean? It's just like, I remember when my grandma used to just tuck me in and tell me that story. It's just so nice. But dude, this is the family that we're talking about. And so often we're thinking, have I done enough to discount myself from being used by God? Yeah, I know he made promises. I know he talked miraculous, but not with my track record. Have I done too much? Is God saying, man, I want to do something good in your life. Oh, I really wanted to. You had so much promise, but you screwed it up. And we see here that God's faithfulness is not even dependent on our faithfulness. God's faithfulness is not dependent on our goodness. This is God's faithfulness. If God promises it, he will see it too. Look what the verse says. Now the Lord was gracious to Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did for Sarah what he had promised. So yeah, not only are these guys, the family's not like these pillars of virtue by any stretch. And it's not just like their overt sin, right? It's not just the family sleepovers. It is that when God promises that, hey, your descendants are going to take over the earth, Abraham and Sarah laugh at him. They don't even believe him. This can't happen. Yeah, maybe 50 years ago, but no, this is ridiculous. And I wanted to bring it up because maybe in your life, not only is it just this overt sin and I've screwed everything up in my life, maybe you've just fallen into this hopeless place and just said, not with that, not with this family, not with where I am, not with these consequences I'm going through. And God says, sorry, bud, you can't outdo me. Sorry, you can't get yourself out of what I have promised you. God says that he works all things together for the good of those who love him. You can't out-bad that. You can't out-sin that. It's not up to you. This is up to God's faithfulness, and he will prove it. So first is that God's faithfulness is not dependent on our faithfulness. He does his promises in spite of us. Second thing is this, is that God's timing is perfect. God's timing is perfect. David, who we're going to talk about in a second, he writes the Psalms, and in the Psalms it says that there's every human emotion encaptured in the Psalms. In fact, as he's writing, if you've ever read through it, it's just like the most raw, emotive, vulnerable statements when he's just wrestling with real life stuff. And it's not all good, and this is great. It's God, how could you? And what's this? In fact, the phrase that it shows up 20 times in the Psalms is the phrase, how long? How long? Anybody ever found themselves asking that? You felt promised by God that there would be healing. You felt promised by God that there would be some sort of reconciliation. You felt promised by God that he works all things together for the good of those who love him, and still you're saying, how long? How long? I read through the Bible, and there are God's promises that have taken 5 years to complete. There's God's promises in the Bible that have taken 50 years to complete. There are God's promises in the Bible that have taken hundreds of years across generations to complete. And it's difficult. I'm a how long guy. I watched one episode of Downton Abbey with Kristen, and I said, how long is this thing? Like 5 times in an hour, right? You give me a promise that's across generations, and it is so difficult because I'm like, let's get there, right? Where's the promise thing? Where's the good part? And God is saying, my timing is perfect. Think about that word perfect. Perfect is not pretty good. Perfect is not like, God, I see where you're going there. You could have done this. I would have done this. Perfect is not even debatable. It is perfect. God's timing is perfect. Meaning, if there's something that hasn't come to fruition in your life, I fully believe that God's perfect timing is orchestrating things perfectly so that his goodness is shown more than you ever thought it was possible. Maybe he is preparing you inside of that time for a perfect time. Maybe you are in the middle of a multi-generational promise. God's timing is perfect. Here's another tough reminder. Sip. The fulfillment of God's promises in our life aren't necessarily for our comfort. A lot of times when we think miracles, when we think God's promise, we think the fulfillment of this promise is when everything feels really, really good and is comfortable. And do you know why God brings his promises to fulfillment in our life, ultimately? Is to showcase his goodness, and even actually, usually, in our discomfort. It is to draw us and his other broken children to be reconciled to the relationship that they were created for. The fulfillment of his promises isn't always, this feels great. In fact, sometimes it can feel catastrophic. But God continues to work. God continues to move. He has different goals than we do. He has eternal perspective. He is thinking it forever. He's not thinking what feels good inside of this moment. His sights are much further than ours are. Now, I'm going to say, there are some people in here who hear this and they're like, I needed that. This lands perfectly. God's promises, I'm going to hold on to them. There's other people in here, maybe even a larger group, that goes, I don't know that God's ever promised me anything. You keep saying God's promises, that's great. Abraham had this promise to have kids, but I've never had like a Post-it note fly down from heaven and be like, here, I promise you this, signed God, right? So when you talk God's promises, I don't really know what to hold on to inside of that. I don't even know what to expect or what to pray for. A couple things I'll say to that. One is that the Bible is full of God's promises to us. That's when we say read the Bible, it's not because God has an Excel spreadsheet up there. He's like, who read their Bible today? We read the Bible is because there are times in my life when I'm sitting there late at night in the middle of something that is heavy that I have to cling to a promise that God has given me. There are moments when Kristen and I, in marriage, are in the tough times and we have to hold on to this promise that God has given. There are times when I get a diagnosis or somebody I know gets a diagnosis and I have to hold on to the promises that God has given me. And so when I encourage, and when Pastor Eric and Darlene encourage us to be in groups, it's because we need to be around other people who are wanting to get into God's goodness, into His Word, so that we can read His promises over us and know what He is saying is going to come to fruition in our life. That is necessary, okay? So, by the way, there's one group that's coming up. You will hear this over the course of the next 4 weeks. It's called Rooted. It is something that's become a staple of our church, something that I've been through several times. It is a 10-week experience, and I've tried many times to articulate it beyond experience, and it's difficult to do. But lodge that in the back of your brain. When you hear Rooted, and we have sign up for Rooted, which is already on the app, please take a step of faith and go sign up for that. I promise, it's a commitment. It's once a week for 10 weeks. I promise you it is something that will do monumental things in your life. I promise you that. So anyway, keep your eye out for that. Okay, so that's one thing is, yes, we want to be, what are God's promises? That's one that we read. He works all things together for the good of those who love Him. Good, we can rally around that. And yet, while I do believe that God makes promise to us that He'll see to fruition, also, I think that we can posture ourselves a lot of times to be used in the miraculous even when we don't know a specific promise to cling to. I still think that God works miracles inside of the articulated, in the ambiguous. And we can posture ourselves in a certain way that God can use us in the middle of that. So, here's this story that second story we're going to tell, and here's why it takes context. The Bible is split New Testament, Old Testament, okay? Which simply is split by the life of Jesus. When Jesus came here, died on the cross, it says that He sacrificed Himself. He knew that's why He was coming to earth. And when He did that, He took on Himself, inside of that, the consequence, the eternal consequence of our rebellion. Everything that we've done, thought, said, even just our state of rebellion and sin, turning our back on God, instead of us having to be responsible for that, all of the wrath that God has for sin and rebellion was poured out, was satisfied in Jesus in that moment. It's important because you hear people go, all right, are we talking New Testament God or are we talking Old Testament God, right? And God is perfect. He is perfectly loving. In fact, He cannot waver. That would be denying Himself. He cannot deny His own characteristic of perfection. He is perfectly consistent throughout the thing. But it's important to know when we talk Old Testament, this is before the time that Jesus had become the final sacrifice. And so when there was sin in the Old Testament, there were sacrifices that had to be made routinely as atonement, which means paying for those sins in your life. Okay? It's important to know because the context that they lived in was far different than the context that we live in. You'll see why that's necessary in a second. So, David, you know the story, David and Goliath. Well, David, who kills Goliath, grows up, he becomes king. Probably heard the story, but one day he sees this beautiful woman bathing, her name's Bathsheba, and he goes, hey, I'm into that. Come on, bring her here. And they go, hey, she's married to this dude named Uriah. He goes, I don't give a crap, I'm the king. And so they bring her to him. He sleeps with Bathsheba, and she gets pregnant. Bathsheba gets pregnant. Well, Uriah, who is a warrior, he is a fighter. David's like, oh my gosh. Yeah, hey, bring Uriah back. They can play some Scrabble, right? And then I can pawn this kid off as Uriah's kid. So he comes back, Uriah does, and this guy is so honorable that he says, I'm not going to go sleep with my wife when my friends, my soldiers, are dying on the battlefield. And he refuses to sleep with Bathsheba. And so David essentially sends his own death warrant, this message that says, hey, take Uriah to the generals, take Uriah to the front of the front lines of the battlefield, and then pull back and let him be killed. He delivers that message. Sure enough, they do it. Uriah is killed, and then David takes Bathsheba into the palace. There's a moment where this guy, he's a prophet, his name is Nathan, and he comes to David, and he essentially says, like, here's what you've done. And David was so locked into this sin, he was so in this mindset that he was justifying everything, right, and just thinking a certain way, and he has this moment of clarity where everything hits him, and he's like, he realizes what he's done, and he just has a breakdown. David was described as a man after God's own heart, and he realizes how far he's fallen, and he just like crumples to the ground. He's like, my God, what have I done? What have I done? And this is where it gets difficult. Again, this is before Jesus had taken the punishment for all of our sin, but even his insight into how big of a deal sin is, rebellion is against God, is that God says, because of your sin, David, your child that Bathsheba has will become ill and die. So David, now, take it out of a biblical context, take it just as a parent, right, is just, he doesn't know what to do. And he begins to pray for his child. And he's weeping. It says that he puts on sackcloth, which is like an outward expression of mourning and grief. And he's praying and he's weeping. He refuses to eat. And it says that it's so severe that the people around him, the servants, are trying to console him or trying to help him, and he won't respond to anything. He is just losing it, praying, please God, please God, please God. Here's where we pick it up. 2 Samuel 12, verse 18, on the seventh day, the child died. David's attendants were afraid to tell him that the child was dead. For they thought, while the child was still living, he wouldn't listen to us when we spoke to him. How can we now tell him that the child is dead? He may do something desperate. David noticed that his attendants were whispering among themselves, and he realized the child was dead. Is the child dead? He asked. Yes, they replied, he is dead. Then David got up from the ground. After he had washed, put on lotions, and changed his clothes, he went into the house of the Lord and worshipped. Then he went to his own house, and at his request they served him food, and he ate. His attendants asked him, why are you acting this way? While the child was alive, you fasted and wept, but now that the child is dead, you get up and eat? He answered, while the child was alive, I fasted and wept. I thought, who knows? Who knows? The Lord may be gracious to me and let the child live. I think the linchpin in this story is that phrase, who knows? Who knows? When we talk ambiguous, when we talk about the miraculous, I think that so much of our posture, even in faith, is characterized as who knows. And by the way, the reason I wanted to use this story obviously took the context breakdown, the difference, because now we live in a completely different context where God's wrath has eternally been satisfied on Jesus. We live in a different context. But at least in my experience, I would say that who knows categorizes just my daily interactions more than I've got this thing figured out. Even when God does the miraculous in my life, if I pray for something fervently, most times what I'm praying for specifically doesn't come to fruition. Most times I include a human element to my desires, to my prayers. And the head scratching, the confusing, the no, God, it was supposed to look like this. It wasn't supposed to look like that diagnosis. No. That's God, that's not what I prayed for. No. It wasn't supposed to look like this crossroads. It wasn't supposed to look like this injury. It wasn't supposed to look like this relationship going off the rails then. Here's how it's supposed to look like. And I think the reason that I titled this Humble Beginnings as the sermon title is because the posture that God needs a lot of times is us being willing in faith to lean into the who knows. Not for us to tell God what it looks like. God, this is how the miracle is going to go. This is what it's going to look like. Instead, to know if God's timing is perfect, if He continues to work despite our faults, that He is orchestrating things for His goodness to be shown. We have to have faith inside of that. And we continue to ask, who knows? Man, why do you guys... We just had a... Actually, this past year, there's been like 3 different times that my wife and I have prayed for a child who is dead, who died, and was praying for resurrection. People are like, dude, why are you doing that? That's crazy. Because who knows? Who knows? We serve a big God. His ways are not my ways. His thoughts are not my thoughts. Graham, why do you continue to send texts when they're not received and when they're not returned? Because who knows? Who knows? His ways are not my ways. His thoughts are not my thoughts. I will continue to lean into the who knows with faith, knowing that what I specifically want does not determine how good God is. He has eternal perspective. He is continuing to work. I heard a pastor say this once, which I think is brilliant. He said, as our knowledge of God increases, so must the mystery of God, so that it is us growing our faith and not our understanding. As our knowledge of God increases, so much the mystery. Right? So many times we want to be a step ahead. We want to tell God what is necessary. And the posture that is needed, humble beginnings that is needed, is for us to trust that God is good, to ask for the big. We continue to pray. And look, just because I know that what I specifically want might not be what happens, it doesn't mean I stop praying. It doesn't mean I stop asking for things. God will refine what I ask for. God will maneuver me. God will say, here, He will curb my enthusiasm, right? But again, I have to have faith. I wrote that faith is not the absence of intelligence. Faith is not the absence of intelligence. You'll hear that a lot, right? People will look at Christians and say, well, you guys aren't smart enough to figure things out, so you just call it faith, right? Faith is not the absence of intelligence. Faith is the humility to depend on God. It's the humility to depend on God. And while I do think that God does these big, groundbreaking, mind-blowing miracles, not only have I read about them, but I've seen them. I've seen healing. So not only do I believe in that, I also believe that a lot of times us growing our faith, you know what it enables us to do? It enables us to see the miraculous that God is actually doing every day. What I think faith does, when I grow my faith, it actually takes my blinders off, and I'm able to see that God is doing more miracles than I give Him credit for. I'm able to see better, right? It's like, does God do miracles? I'm not sure, and then somebody tells you the story of Nighttown, and you go, oh yeah, okay, I see that. It increases your faith. You begin to look for things in a different capacity. We went to marriage counseling once. Actually, it's been a lot of times, but this one time. Marriage counseling's good, man. It's good. My wife and I, we talk differently. We think differently. Like, you know when they give you that questionnaire before you go in there, and then you just fill it out separately? Every single time, the counselor's like, well, that's interesting. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. He's like, oh, I'm sure it'll work itself out. I'm like, okay, thanks a lot. How much is that? $4,000? Cool, there you go. But anyway, internal processor, she's an out loud processor, introvert, extrovert. We are very different, and in a fit of honesty right now, For a long time, because of filters that I have from my past, I'd created this context or this filter that Kristen was always being passive-aggressive to me. I would respond to just about, and I still struggle with this, will respond to her defensively. And everything is just like this shield of self-protection that is up. And we went to counseling. It took me a while just to realize, my gosh, Graham, everything you're seeing, everything you're receiving is through this broken lens. And you're defensive to even her displays of love. So it got to a point where at least I tried to die to that shield a little bit, to die to that context, to die to the resentment or the distrust. And you know what happened then? I began to see how many times a day Kristen actually does show her love to me. I took the blinders off a little bit. I was like, she will steal a glance at me, right? Oh man, she will do these just little expressions of love throughout the day. Instead of being met with resentment, instead of being met with whatever that was, distrust, instead I could understand, my gosh, my wife does love me. And you know what that does? You know what it does when you realize that somebody loves you? It increases your love. You begin to fortify that relationship. And I think the exact same thing is true with faith. Maybe our lens is distrust. Maybe our lens is from broken expectations. And if we have this mindset shift of that God is good, no matter what you've done in your life, you haven't discounted yourself from being used in the miraculous. His timing is perfect, and he is relentless in his pursuit to reach his broken children. That we begin to notice that God actually does break the course of the natural every day in his pursuit of us. God actually does supernatural things all the time. Comfortable? No. In fact, normally they're uncomfortable. But he is pursuing us every moment of every day, just wanting a relationship that is deeper with us. So that's our prayer. Our prayer today, what I wrote was, start your track record. Start your track record with God today. Pray for something. Pray for something. It doesn't matter if it's the right prayer. Think what maybe would God want for your life, and pray on that. Pray something big, right? Pray something big. I'm going to warn you, one time in my life, it was a really self-absorbed season of my life, and I said, all right, God, I'm praying for selflessness. And 5 months later, we had twins. So there's a little warning there. Don't pray for selflessness. I'm going to tell you, it might not look the way that you think, right? Whenever you pray for something, I was like, God, how about just like a magic wand? Like, here, you're selfless. And he's like, no. So what you're looking for might not be what you think, but God will answer that. And the second thing is put yourself in a position for God to prove himself faithful to you. What is a prayer that you can pray that can only be attributed to God? Here's another last thing I'll say is confession. Sometimes I come here on Sunday morning and I've got this energy drink called Bang that's supposed to be better for you. It only has 7,000 grams of sugar. But I'll drink this Bang energy drink and I will pray for energy. Right? And then so when I make it through the morning, I'm like, I'm not totally sure right, if that was God or if that was the Bang energy drink. Here's what I'll say. Don't drink the energy drink and pray for energy. Choose something that can only be attributed to God. Choose something that is big enough that when you see that come to fruition, your track record isn't with an energy drink. Your track record is you begin to grow faith because God will see that answered. And when we have the faith that God is good, we are not looking to see whether he accepts or rejects our prayer because we know that he hears us. Instead, we begin to look how God answers our prayers. Knowing that he is good, this is not saying you are worthy or unworthy of your prayers being answered. He's saying, watch, look closely. Look at the way that I work inside of your life, because I am relentless in my pursuit to draw you closer to me. This is our declaration. God, we are praying to you this morning that we believe that you are a miraculous God. We believe that you are a supernatural God. Help us with our unbelief. Start a track record of faith that we know that you are good. There's nothing that we can do to discount us from your goodness. Work in us. Let's pray. Father, oh man, there have been so many times that things haven't gone the way that we thought. And we are so thankful that your faithfulness is not dependent on our faithfulness. Your faithfulness is not dependent on how good that we are. So continue to work your miracles. We pray big, audacious things because you are a big, audacious God. Nothing is too big. Open our eyes, take off the blinders of distrust so we can see the miracles that you continue to work. In your precious name, amen.